webinar on charging the way forward, unveiling the European Alternative Fuels Observatory 2023 Consumer Insights on EV Driving in Europe Monitor, a very long title for something that is very dear to us. So my name is Axel Fakiri. I'm the Deputy Head of Unit for Sustainable and Intelligent Transport here in DG Move. And I'm really excited to see many of you being with us today here for learning about this consumer monitor. As you know, transition to sustainable and finally zero emission mobility in road transport is really without alternative when we look at both the need of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the road transport sector, but also the need to remain globally competitive and also attractive to investment. And you will recall, of course, that under this mandate, the European co-legislator has really taken important policy decisions with the revision of the CO2 standards for light and heavy-duty vehicles, with a new alternative fuels infrastructure regulation. Together, those they really set a clear framework for the transition ahead of us, including with binding requirements for infrastructure rollout through the EAFO, which, by the way, in global comparison, is really the first instrument to do so on such a broad level. Now, of course, we are in implementation phase, and we are in a very pivotal time of market transition. We now have a fleet of around 5 million battery electric vehicles, 3.6 million plug-in hybrids. And in the next years, we need a substantive increase to match the CO2 standards for cars and vans, also for HDV. And that, of course, in turn will require that we have a much broader segments of those consumers that will purchase a new vehicle, deciding to purchase a zero emission vehicle. And markets hence need to go beyond this first wave of early adopters and particularly extend into the medium and into the smaller vehicle categories. Now we are all reading different interpretations of the current market dynamics. Are registration rates stalling? Is there hesitation? Are expectations not being met? Are we on a good track or not? And in this context, it is highly advisable to look in detail into what matters, consumer perspectives across a wide range of national markets. Yeah, to look at where the facts are. And this is what we did with this consumer monitor. It's one of the largest consumer surveys in the field with 12 member states and 19,000 consumers, a very rich, a very comprehensive database, which will help us to understand better and project consumer perspective and market dynamics in a local perspective. Now, that is what we want to do with you today. We'll listen to the presentation of the key findings, and then we want to discuss the implications. And before I hand over to Yuri, I would like to say still a few words about the European Alternative Fuels Observatory, because this is really sort of dear to us here in the Commission, and of course relevant for all of us and for you who are active in the field. This is really a portal that ensures that policymakers, companies, academia alike have access to high quality, timely and detailed data on the adoption of electrification and alternative fuels, covering all modes of transport. And in addition to statistics, you can also find other useful information there on the policy incentives, projects, and etc. So enough of the advertisement, but saying EAFO is really, really a useful tool to go to. And it is actually managed by consortium, which is led by FIA Sustainable Mobility. And one of the partners in the consortium is Vrije Universiteit Brussels, so VUB, that actually led this consumer monitor survey. So I have the pleasure to pass the floor now to Yuri van Mierlo, you are professor and head of the Electromobility Research Center here at the VUB. And you will not only moderate this event, but you will also now illuminate a little bit further the overall context of our discussion. So over to you.
Yuri, we can't hear you.
Test again. Can you hear me?
Now, yes, perfectly.
Aha, okay. Yeah, there are so many microphones on my device that you have to find out which one is really working. So thank you, Axel. That was what I was saying for this kind introduction, and also to explain why the consumer monitor is so important to have insights in consumer behavior. It's my pleasure as head of the Electromobility Mobile Research Center at the University in Brussels to share the webinar of this afternoon. And maybe I will first start with showing you the program of today. So if you can go to the next slide. Yes, indeed. There will be now this short introduction. It's almost finished. And then Professor Lieselot van Haverbeker from our university in Brussels, she will present the results of the consumer monitor. She will show you the key findings and the conclusions. And this will be the basis for a further discussion. A further discussion that will be in two parts. The third part with the panel. We have keynote speakers for this panel that will provide their insight. And then, of course, all the people present here, they can also be part of the Q&A. So who do we have in our panel? I short introduce them. We start with Sarah Hollander. She is Head of Sustainable Mobility Department of the Brussels Capital Region. Next, there will be Robin Loos, Senior Sustainable Transport Officer and Deputy Head of Sustainability Team of the European Consumers Organization. Next, we have Anders Lewald, Principal Advisor from the Swedish Energy Agency Transport Unit. Then we have Matt Ersin, Senior Director from Fastnet, Government and Public Affairs. And Axel, you met already, and Lieselot you will meet in a few minutes. And of course, we will wrap up at the end. Be sure to close this webinar around 5 o'clock. I have the pleasure to introduce the housekeeping rules. Maybe you already noticed it, but we are recording this event, so it can be used for later, or can be later used. The material will all be made available on the EAFO website, and also all the reports and everything that will be presented you can find on that very interesting website. And to prepare yourself for the second part after Lieselot's presentation, feel free to prepare some questions and put your questions into the chat option of this Zoom platform. And we will try to wrap up all these questions and group them a little bit together and bring them to the different panel members. Before I give the word to Lieselot, where are we with the facts and figures, and where does we stand with Europe? On the left side, you see the growth rate of the numbers of electric vehicles. So we have now around 4,600,000 electric vehicles in our fleet. And on the right side, you see over time a number of AC and DC charging points. So 600,000 AC and almost 100,000 DC charging points are there. In the next slide, you see the percentage of the purchase, so how much is as part of the fleet. And there we see for battery electric vehicles, this represents the numbers I showed you with up to now 1.7%. And the plug-in hybrids are 1.3%. Hydrogen and liquefied natural gas are almost 0%. LPG is the highest with 3%, and compressed natural gas is almost 4.5%. On the right, you see the distribution in Europe. So the darker the green color, the more charging poles are in that specific country. Next slide, please. And finally, you see the market share of the total registration. So the new vehicles sold or bought by the different people. And you see a high increase of the dark blue line in the left figure over time for the battery BEV, battery electric vehicles, followed by the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And so the question is how this line will continue, because you see a small drop now in 2024, but okay, the year is just started, or is somewhere in the middle, let's say. So We have to see how this will progress in the future. And on the right, you see the growth of the recharging points in Europe over time, which is rather stable. So now you have an idea of some figures, and to position a little bit the speech of Professor Lieselot van Haverbeke, it's my pleasure to introduce our MOBI Electromobility Research Center at the University in Brussels. We are a multidisciplinary team of over 120 experts. We started end of the 70s with our first fleet of electric vehicles, so we are kind of pioneering in this field. And in the meantime, we have 5 different research centers within MOBI. One is what we call electric and autonomous vehicles. That is the team led by Lieselot van Haverbeke, and it's a team that brings in the socio-economics aspects. If you are a multidisciplinary team, we look to electromobility from different sides, and consumer behavior, total cost of ownership, and so on is very important. That's in that part. In the middle, you see the e-powers team. They develop the power electronics and the drive systems for electric vehicles, as well as for charging infrastructure. Next, we have a whole team working on the next generation batteries, solid-state batteries, embedded batteries with embedded sensors, self-healing materials, and so on. Left on the right, you have the Evergy group. They work on the integration of electric vehicle in the electricity grid, which is smart charging and vehicle-to-grid application and playing on the electricity market. And finally, on the right, you have the Merlin team that has the expertise in-house on all lighting systems, indoor and outdoor lighting systems, but also lighting technology that can be used for self-driving vehicles. So this is MOBI in a nutshell, and now it's my pleasure to hand over the word to Professor Lieselot van Haverbeke to give you the insights of the results of our consumer monitor of last year. Lieselot, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yuri, for the introduction. Also, Axel, for setting the scene. Welcome, everybody. Also, good afternoon from my part. And it is my pleasure to share the results of the EAFO 2023 Consumer Monitor with you this afternoon. It has been said already, actually, but I would like to reiterate, why do we need a consumer monitor? And well, if we zoom out, it has been mentioned, we want to mitigate climate change, we want to improve air quality. And so that means that our mobility system as a whole needs to change, in the sense that next to the modal shift, where trips by cars are replaced by other modes, such as walking or biking or public transport and the like, we also need a motor shift for those remaining car trips. And as we have seen in the numbers on the previous slides, EV adoption is rising and the deployment of recharging infrastructure is in full force. And that is because of innovation in technology and a clear policy vision. So the transition is taking place. Yet, those numbers on the previous slides, they are very important to monitor and to see how the behavior is changing and what it means in terms of car registrations, in terms of deployed charging infrastructure. But that is all what we call revealed behavior. So that is the observable change. Now, how do we get to know what citizens, what car drivers, what mobility users, what they think about this transition? How do they experience this transition, and what are their needs and their concerns? And that is why we placed the consumer at the very center of this study, to see and to hear what are their concerns. So we did a large-scale survey to ask about the opinions of passenger vehicle drivers. And to be able to do an in-depth analysis of their responses, we started out with asking them about sociodemographic information and also their current mobility behavior. And then we forwarded towards their anticipations. For example, do you plan to buy a next car? And what type of car will that be? And when will you buy that car? But also, what are your attitudes towards electric vehicles? Well, what are your motivations? And then we also had battery electric vehicle drivers in our sample. So we could ask them, how do you experience now driving an electric car in Europe? What about your experience with recharging infrastructure? And that type of vehicle that you have bought, does it satisfy your needs? So doing this study regularly allows us to monitor the challenges and the opportunities for citizens in the e-mobility transition with facts and figures. So we have data directly from the source, from those citizens, from those car drivers, and the insights are then accurate and relevant information for policymakers to continue to raise awareness and create acceptance, but also for the sector as guidance for future developments, for associations, for researchers, actually for all types of stakeholders. So that is why we did this research in 2022, and we have done it again in autumn last year, 2023. And today we present those results of the 2023 edition. The research methodology, very briefly, I don't go into the details here, but we asked questions about socio-demographics, mobility characteristics and behavior, for the BEV drivers, also their recharging behavior, and then attitudes and motivation and future car acquisition. It was a survey that was done last autumn, and we reached with that survey within 12 European countries. And then you can test your flag knowledge here. It's Germany, France, Denmark, Spain, Netherlands, Italy, Sweden, Slovenia, Luxembourg, Hungary, Lithuania, and Belgium. Within those 12 countries, we reached more than 19,000 respondents in a representative sample, I must say. And of those 19,000, more than 2,000 drove a battery electric vehicle. The survey took 20 minutes to respond, so we have a lot of information. Today we will provide some key insights, and as already was mentioned, we have the reports ready for each of the countries and also at the EU aggregated level. Today I will mainly focus on results on EU aggregated level. Here and there give a little bit more information about the spread of results in certain countries, but the focus is on the general level. Let's first have a look, how do the respondents look at advantages and disadvantages of electric vehicles? And we gave a selection of possibilities there to the respondents, but they also could add other reasons. So if we ask them what are the main advantages of an electric vehicle, then a lot of the respondents, they select that it is better for climate. So that information, that knowledge has clearly been well transferred, and people understand that this is a need and it is important. On the other hand, they look also at their individual gain, because a lot of the respondents also select the option that an electric vehicle is more economical to use, and that the driving characteristics of an electric vehicle seem to be very attracting, so that the car is well comfortable to ride, that it is quiet, etc. Now I must add to this, a top 3 is always nice, but on a very close 4th place, a lot of the respondents also selected the option that electric vehicles are better for human health and environment, so no tailpipe pollutant emissions. And in that sense, I think it's very interesting to see here that the respondents, they look at the greater picture, climate, human health, environment, and they also look at their individual picture, economical to use and driving characteristics. So this information apparently has been clearly transferred. What is then blocking adoption still? So what are the 3 challenges? Well, as a first item there, the price of the electric car was selected. The price is still high. I think we need to recognize this, especially if you compare it to internal combustion engine vehicles in the lower or in the smaller car segments. There is a significant difference, and that is clearly indicated by the respondents. Next to that, the charging opportunities are indicated as disadvantages. A lot of respondents indicate that there is no private recharging possibility for them at home, and others then select that there are too few public slow recharging points. Of course, this goes hand in hand, and that also has to do with range anxiety, which was on a 4th place as one of the reasons why an electric car has not been bought yet. To me, this was not a surprise, those top 3 challenges, since I started doing research more than 10 years, almost 15 years ago, into consumer behavior on e-mobility. These barriers have been put forward. So in that sense, nothing new here, but what is important is that with the results of this survey, we can see how big and how truthful are these concerns. And that is what we will do in the next slides. Let's have a look at expectations on the one hand of the non-BEV drivers in the survey, and then what the BEV drivers report in their experience. For example, talking about the price, we asked for the willingness to pay, and that is always a tricky question. How much are you willing to pay for a certain good or service? Of course, people tend to answer a bit lower than a manufacturer or a producer would like to see there. But what is important here is that we see a difference. The difference between the willingness to pay for a battery electric vehicle and for the internal combustion vehicle. And that difference is 5,000 euro. This is generally speaking, so for the results on EU level. Now, let's see how that compares in terms of the purchase price that the battery electric vehicle drivers reported in the survey. And here we can see that, well, indeed, almost 50% have paid more than 40,000 euros for their battery electric car. And then 40% paid between 20,000 and 40,000 euros. And then a smaller proportion, less than 20,000 euros. So in that sense, we still see that this willingness to pay gap and the actual price that has been paid is indeed quite large. Next to purchasing a vehicle, there is also the possibility of leasing a vehicle. And also that is something we asked them price information about. So we can see here that when you look at the highest price category, more than 700 euros, that was 14% of the respondents who answered this. And well, we can see that then 18% paid between 500 and 700 and 60% less than 500 euros a month for their leasing of their vehicle. In terms of the proportions of the ownership, so talking about purchase versus leasing or having a company car, we also have the statistics there. 70% indicated that they have a private car, 20% a leased car, and then 11% a company car. Again, I want to emphasize that these are the general EU numbers. We know, for example, for Belgium, that the company cars there are highly overrepresented because of policy measures. Yeah? And that is clearly something you see then in the Belgian report on the statistics for this survey. So that always has to be taken into account. But in conclusion, price remains a challenge. And of course, price goes hand in hand with the battery size for an electric vehicle. And if we have a look there, in terms of the expectations for the battery size, what range should your battery electric vehicle have? If you ask this question to non-BEV drivers, then we see that almost 50% answers, I would like it to have more than 500 kilometers range. And then the others, a third, would like it to have minimally 300 kilometers range, and then a minority says 200 to 300 kilometers. How does this compare with actual ranges in the current fleets of the respondents who drive a battery electric vehicle? Well, there we see that only 20% has more than 500 kilometer range, and 60% has between 300 and 500 kilometer range, 60% 200 to 300 kilometer range, and then others still lower. So expectations versus reality. And I think this also helps in terms of interpreting the price and can help raising awareness in terms of what is now really needed as range for a battery electric vehicle. Because if you ask those owners of a battery electric vehicle, is that enough as range? Those 60% that have between 300 and 500 kilometers, for example. Well, overall, 84% of the battery electric vehicle drivers in the survey, they said, yes, the range that I have is enough to fulfill my daily mobility needs. So this can help in terms of informing future adopters with respect to realistic expectations for range, and then also this goes hand in hand with price. Now, range and charging infrastructure, another thing that goes hand in hand. Let's have a look what it means in terms of charging options for battery electric drivers. So those 2,000 respondents who have an electric vehicle, we have asked them, where do you daily or at least multiple times a week recharge? And then, as we know, the majority at the moment of EV drivers, they have opportunities at home. So 55% from the respondents indicated that they have a recharging station or a wall box at home where they daily or multiple times a week charge. And 25% indicates that that is the case for a socket at home, a regular socket. In terms of recharging at the workplace, that comes in the third place, 20% for frequency. And then we have the public recharging infrastructure, the slow and the fast, accounting for 18% and 10% of very regular usage. And finally, also semi-public recharging stations are being used by 10% daily or multiple times a week. So we know that for the moment, most of the battery electric vehicle drivers have that infrastructure at home, but once adoption is increasing, that more and more future adopters will be directed towards public recharging stations. And then if we ask about the key features of such a station, well, clearly, three things are important. It needs to be fully operational. That is quite logical, but still could be a barrier. What is also very important, clear and transparent price information. And then as a third element, short or no waiting time was selected as one of the most important features of public recharging stations. The fully operational requirement is quite straightforward, but let's have a look in terms of clear and transparent price information, as this is also what AFIR is further guiding. So here we see that asking respondents about the fact that they know how much they will pay before they start their recharging. On an EU aggregated level, we see that 55% of the respondents agree, and it differs. It goes from strongly agree, by somewhat agree to agree, but in general, 55% agrees. And then we have some extra numbers here to show you the spread in the results for different countries. It was mentioned, I think, that Germany, France, and the Netherlands, they have the majority of the charging infrastructure in Europe. So it's interesting to look at those three countries as they are quite comparable in terms of charging infrastructure. And so we see that, for example, there in Germany, this statement is more often agreed to if you compare it, for example, to the Netherlands, and if you even compare it to the average of the EU zone. What about the waiting times then? Well, we can see that about a third says to never wait when the charging station is occupied, and so they leave without recharging. Another third says we wait 15 minutes or less. And then lastly, another third, if you combine the next categories, they wait even up till 1 hour. There is a difference in terms of the results here, although it's smaller than on the previous slide. You can see that waiting time for the EU aggregated accounts to approximately between 60 and 70%. That is the case for also the 3 countries, Germany, France, and the Netherlands. However, what is quite interesting here is that you see that in France, 42% indicates that they wait 15 minutes or less, while on the other hand, for example, in Germany, 37% says they never wait. So again, this difference can be indicative also in terms of policy measures, but also in terms of well, the density of the charging infrastructure in certain regions. So that's, of course, a local given, and it should also be interpreted in that sense. And then some other statements that we surveyed in terms of the satisfaction with public charging infrastructure. For example, do you know how much time it will take to fully recharge at a given public recharging point? Happily, most of the respondents agree to that, so they can indeed estimate the time. On the other hand, we see, for example, in terms of having the information with respect to public recharging infrastructure in their vicinity. In France, we see that 31% agrees to that, meaning that the remainder of the respondents, they actually don't indicate that they don't have sufficient information with that respect. And a little bit the same with the next statement about the choice for charging point operators and electromobility service providers. Whereas for Germany and the Netherlands, we can see that that is then higher. And a final thing about the public charging infrastructure linked to traveling not only locally, but also going abroad. So the cross-border possibilities on an EU aggregated level. Well, we asked if battery electric vehicle drivers have traveled abroad. 40% indicate there that they did, and 43% said they never did. Again, quite a difference, because if you look at France, 58% indicated that they never did. While on the other hand, in the Netherlands and in Germany, more than half of the drivers went abroad multiple times. If they went abroad, then we continued how easy was that, and we can see that, well, it ranges between 50 and 60% of that being experienced as an easy trip. So no real concerns there, except that if we ask for the main problem, we see that few recharging stations along the way, or not enough information where to recharge, are the items that come up quite prominently. And then, having addressed the 3 barriers in a little bit more detail, let's take an overall look. We see here that the attitudes of the non-battery electric vehicle drivers, how it evolved over the last 2 years. So in green, you see the results of 2022, and then in blue, you see the results of 2023. The interest has evolved from 44% to 37%, and actually the attitude has evolved in the same direction. So it has decreased a bit, the positive attitude towards battery electric vehicles, and the negative attitudes have risen. Also, the intention to adopt a battery electric vehicle as a next car has slightly decreased. I think this is an overall phenomenon that we can see, and especially with the with the elections that were upcoming, we have seen that in that sense the narrative I think has changed a bit, and that could be the reason why these results or have evolved in this direction. So finally, as overall conclusion, we have actually reconfirmed the barriers that we know of, that is price, range, and infrastructure. On the other hand, we have a much clearer insight in those barriers, and I think those insights, they are really helpful in terms of creating information campaigns, creating awareness, and having objective numbers, real facts and figures that can help policymakers, industry to further work on the transition. This information has all been written down in a lot of reports. We also try to summarize them in infographics, and these are available already now, I think since this morning, on the EAFO website, so where you can find all the reports and all the numbers. I must emphasize that this was work done jointly, not only by me, but mainly by our researcher, Dennis Verbiest, and Gabriela Barrera did excellent work in managing the project. Also a big thank to Niamh, Bill, to help out with all the graphics in the communication, and Matic Success was also involved from FIR. Then Yuri, I hand the floor back to you.
Thank you, Lieselot, for this very interesting and clear presentation. I'd like to remind you again that please use the chat to place your questions for our panel members. And we have some people in the background that will group all these questions and bring them to our panel members. I think we can stop sharing the slideshow, I think. So we have our panel members on your screen as soon as I raise my first question. And my first question is addressed to Sarah Hollander. Okay? So for those who joined a little bit later, Sarah is from the Brussels Capital Region, and there she follows the low emission zone in Brussels Capital Region as being head of the Sustainable Mobility Department. And so my question for you, Sarah, is about, of course, related to that low emission zone that was introduced in 2018. And so can you elaborate a little bit on which policy and support measures have been implemented at that time, how they have been revised later onwards, and what is the impact finally on the low emission calendar?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks a lot, Yuri. In Brussels, we introduced the low emission zone in 2018, and there were several steps already in the low emission zone. And since 2022, diesel have to meet the minimum, the Euro 5 standards, and petrol cars Euro 2. And next year we'll have an important step in our low emission zone as well, with the ban of the diesel Euro 5 standards and petrol Euro 2. So it will be still an important step, and we see already a very clear impact on the air quality. What we see on the cars that are driving in Brussels, first of all, it's a shift from diesel towards petrol. In 5 years, we came from two-thirds of the cars driving in Brussels were diesel cars, and 1/3 petrol, and now it's the opposite. And we have a small uptake of EVs at this moment. Most of them are company cars, but in 5 years, the air quality is really going very better. We have for nitrogen dioxide and NO2, we see in the measurements that there is a decrease with 40% of the concentration. So it's really an encouraging result. And we see also some research shows that, well, in Belgium, everywhere the air quality is better since 5 years, but in Brussels with the low emission zone, it went faster than in the other cities without a low emission zone in Belgium. So low emission zone is really effective. What we do to help the Brussels citizens to shift towards other mobility behavior? Well, first of all, we have in Brussels a really clear mobility vision, a mobility plan, and Brussels region invested a lot in public transport and also traffic calming measures to achieve a modal shift. And we also, related to the low emissions zone, we support the modal shift. For households who abandon their car, they receive a mobility budget that they can use for public transport or to buy a bicycle or use mobility services. And they also can benefit for free a mobility coaching session. And we are also focusing on the shift towards electric vehicles, of course, and where we are focusing the last years on the facilitation. So which sharing knowledge how to, for companies, for example, how to shift towards an electric vehicle park, how to change car policies in companies. We're also helping, we have a facilitator on charging infrastructure. So we are helping building owners to install charging points in their garages. So we have give technical advice, technical support to building owners and companies, everyone who needs more help. And also we deployed a dense network of on-street charging points in Brussels.
Okay. Before coming to that network, the citizens themselves in Brussels capital region, what barriers do they see for driving an electric car?
Well, see, the price is the main barrier for the citizens. We see that the uptake of electric vehicles goes really fast for the company cars, but not at all for the households who have to buy a car themselves. Most of the Brussels citizens are buying a car on the second-hand market, and so there is not this market is not there yet for electric vehicles. So that is a big challenge. And for the professional users, we had a lot of contacts recently with the taxi drivers, and for them, they want to have more fast chargers. That's their biggest issue, I think.
You were talking about the air quality in Brussels, which is in some areas better than in other areas. Do you see a correlation there between income from people and the quality of the air?
Yeah, in the air quality was the worst in the neighborhoods in Brussels with the lowest incomes, and that's also where we have the biggest impact. And with the low emission zone, have the biggest impact on those neighborhoods where the air quality was worst. So that's yeah.
Second-hand market of electric vehicles there. I see.
Yeah.
Concerning the charging infrastructure, because Brussels has a rollout plan in 2022 for charging infrastructure. So do you have already an idea of the main results of this deployment of the infrastructure?
Yeah, well, we had, yeah, well, having the plan gives us a clear framework on what are our priorities on the rollout, and well, one of the first focus was to deploy a good on-street network, because 70% of the car drivers in Brussels do not have their own parking space, so they depend on public chargers. And so we deployed a network of normal chargers. And the first focus, and it's the data-driven approach, which we work with the VUB on that. So each year we planify the next year's deployment for the chargers, and it's based on the user's needs. So first we had a strategic network, then we focused on the high coverage. So normally at the end of this year, every citizen will have access to a public charger at maximum 150 meters. And for next year, the network will be enhanced there where the use is where the energy demand and the use is the highest. So with the data-driven model, we know where we have to focus and where we have to put more charges. And on the other hand, we want to have a good network off street, of course. We have a regulating framework, so there are mandatory quota starting from next year to install in the parking's charges also. And we are helping the building owners with technical advice to enable them to realize these challenges.
Thank you. Interesting. Thank you, Sarah. We will come back to you because I see in the chat that there are already some questions. Some of them are related. Where can we find more information on the results of the low emission zone? So in the meantime, you can have a look to the chat, and then I will first address some questions to the other panel members.
Okay.
So Robin Loos from the Consumers Organization in Europe. Well, probably you have some ideas how consumer thinks and what are their challenges for them. So as we all saw, and it was already also mentioned by Sarah, the price of electric vehicles is one of the main barriers and also identified in the survey presented by Lieselot. So what's your opinion on leasing of electric vehicles and second-hand electric vehicles? Could that be an option for a large part of the population? So what are the challenges you see for this option, and what is needed from our policymakers and industry to tackle these?
Yeah, I think as Mr. Volkeri said, we are at a pivotal moment, and to come from early adopters to the mass market, we need to know how the mass market actually works, how the big mass of consumers actually drive and use a car. And one of the main elements to know is, it was mentioned earlier, is that most people don't buy new cars. They simply don't. They go to the second, third-hand market. This is where they find the car they need. And the trend has been accelerating. The trend of people not buying new cars has been self-reinforcing for different factors. And not only because of electrification, mainly because cars are getting heavier. We have less choice of small, affordable vehicles. The price of cars has been increasing tremendously, unrelated again to electrification. And so electric cars come into that moment where people realize that buying a new car becomes more and more difficult. And so it's easy to put the blame on one part of the market which faces so much misinformation, right? But that doesn't hide the fact that, yeah, electric cars are more expensive. Solutions, I think promoting the second-hand market is the way to go. Because this won't change the fact people will need a second-hand market with electric vehicles. There are several ways to do it. I think Belgium has kind of drawn the path for company cars, which is the main bulk of the new cars being sold. Company cars being electrified on a faster pace than the one already set by the EU. There is specific incentives for the second-hand market or lower income people. And here I'm not talking about giving people 5,000 or 6,000 euros for buying a new car. I'm talking about new financial instruments people could find via banks or loans that are supported by the state to help them get that car, the car they need, right? So it could be leasing options. France has tried something that seems to work well, although we know some caveats of it. We know the limitation, the impact on public finance, also the impact on the production side. But this seems to be the way forward to incentivize that. Specific incentive for the second-hand market, as I said, putting the burden on those who can actually benefit the most. But one of the main elements, I think, to tackle the pricing issues is probably ambitious, but we need to switch back the market to more efficient, smaller vehicles, which disappeared in the last few years. And this is going to create many problems in the future, because if we keep feeding the new car market with massive cars that people don't want to find in the second and third hand markets, we will end up with a bottleneck there.
Yeah. Yeah, you were talking about the purchase price and also the leasing. But yeah, the advantage of leasing is that all cost is included there. And is there also not an issue of lack of knowledge? Because next to buying a vehicle, there is a lot of other costs related to that. So if you look into a total cost of ownership, where you include fueling or charging your vehicle, the insurance, the maintenance, and so on, the picture can be different, but maybe most consumers, they don't see a vehicle as a TCO thing approach, but they only see the purchase price. Is there a need to have more information towards them? And will
Indeed.
that be an option, or is there another need of information?
Indeed, I fully agree with you. It's one of the exercise that we run quite frequently, this TCO analysis. And the picture is very clear for us. Electric vehicles will help people save money. Already today, in many countries, this is the most financially interesting choice to make. But there is this price barrier at the moment. But when we run these TCO studies, we mostly focus again on the second-hand market, because this is where the car being cheaper to buy, the benefits can really double, triple for consumers. So there's no question asked on what is the best financial option for people. On the leasing options, I would agree with you with one important caveat, is that we know from our member organizations, consumer organizations in all countries in Europe, that some of these leasing offers contain conditions that do not benefit consumers in the end. Being on the very limited kilometers, very little kilometers you can drive per year, on specific conditions when you return the car, on purchase options after the leasing period. And this needs to be really well checked by market authorities, because we know that some of these schemes, if you buy it up after 4 years or 3 years of leasing, you might end up in a worse situation than if you had bought the car in the previous case. So I do believe in leasing options, and figures show consumers are going for it. But there's need for an oversight there in how they are proposed to consumers.
Mm-hmm. So informing consumers on TCO of second-hand market was an issue I noted here. Do we need to inform policymakers on the size of that second-hand market? But as you pointed already out, to my impression, a lot of policymakers, they are oriented to the new sales. And the example in Belgium, 2/3 of the vehicles that are sold in Belgium per year are second-hand vehicles. And from the 1/3 that are sold as new vehicles, on that part, only 2/3 is company cars and leasing cars. So there is only, I think, 11 or 13% of private persons that are buying a first electric vehicle. So is also there some awareness to be made towards policymakers?
Yeah, indeed. Just one point on information to consumers. This is not the only way, and it's not the go-to mission, because consumers need to be protected de facto. The environment consumers evolve in should be enough for them to be safe, right? But I think yes, and we are currently in discussions in many countries and at EU level on what can we do with the first-hand market, which is dominated by companies. How do we make sure that this first-hand market help consumers down the line? What type of obligations, what type of incentive can we put there? And indeed, I think there's the image that we had, that people had, that policymakers had, that you can still buy a new car for 10,000 to 12,000 euros. This simply doesn't exist anymore, right? And that completely changed the pictures of how we advertise electric vehicles.
Okay, thank you for answering this first round of questions. And then I go to our next panel member, Anders Lewald from the Swedish Energy Agency. And so I also for you, I have some questions related to how Sweden is well, tackling not only the quantity, but also the quality of public recharging points. As we saw in the survey presented by Lieselot, the fully operation of the station, the waiting times of the station, as well as the transparency of the prices are important. So what's your point of view on quality of charging infrastructure?
But first of all, I would like to thank you for doing the study. It's important that we have studies of this kind, and also it's very interesting to have the possibility to see the different things, the different outcome in different European countries. But to look at quality rather than quantity, quite many years ago, we found out that the quality of recharging we did a study in Stockholm, or the city of Stockholm did, and they found out that the quality wasn't that good. It's many years ago now, but so later on, they have introduced locally a request for an uptime of 95% of local recharging points. We were talking about slow recharging here, I think, in the study, we don't have a national follow-up, but the city in Stockholm and Gothenburg, the two main cities in Sweden, are following up the usage. Nationally, we have had more emphasis on fast charging and home charging, non-public home charging. But Stockholm do follow up their local usage of slow charging, and it's interesting that the sales increase a lot. The sales of electric car increases a lot in the city, both EVs and plug-in hybrids, and also the recharging points, public, and then I'm talking about public slow recharging points, and they are really growing so fast, so we can see a lower usage of them. It's less times when they're used the last years. So the increase in numbers are making the usage less, really. But that doesn't say anything about the question we see in the study here, that people needs more slow charging in cities. But that could occur at the same time, a less usage at the same time as more is needed, and that's because it's so difficult to find out exactly where you want them. That's a tricky question, and where you want them, it's not always possible to place them. So we do at the local level follow up even the quality side of it.
Do you have dedicated models for that, for the location position of the charging infrastructure? Like, for instance, in Brussels Capital Region, as Sarah mentioned a little bit, is that they make use of a model. Firstly, it was started with the socioeconomic backgrounds of families, and then you can estimate where the market take-up in Brussels region will first occur. And now the models are based on the usage of these charging infrastructure, and where there is already a high demand for energy. So we know that we should invest more in these locations for the next stage of infrastructure. Do you have similar kind of tools in Sweden?
I'm not fully aware of the tools in the city of Stockholm, but there are many EVs, and you have a lot of public charging, so you can go for the second step and really to look where are the usage really, I guess, for a city like Stockholm. But we have also general research being made, and hopefully that could hopefully be used nationally. We're looking for people who have a car and live in a flat which do not have a parking of their own. That's not very usual in Sweden. That's a smaller percentage than you expect in Brussels, for instance. Yeah. But we're trying to figure out, could we use public data to sort of narrow it down to a local level, and to see how many chargers do you need there, or what kind of charging do they need who has this situation. But our main focus is really to have home charging for people who have their own parking space.
Okay. You were talking about 95% uptime of the charging infrastructure. In case this is not met, is there a kind of penalty, or what will happen when you cannot deliver the quality of this service?
I don't know exactly what kind of penalty there is, but there is a follow-up on this. So and it's important to notice also that the market in Sweden is really deregulated very much. So it's private companies who do the investments. They have the right to use the space for a while, let's say 10 years, but still they can be exchanged if they don't fulfill the requirements.
Okay, taking a step away from the recharging infrastructure and talking about the broader policy measures implemented in Sweden, can you elaborate a little bit on the different financial incentives there are there to electric vehicle uptake?
Yes, we have had a bonus-malus system as the main policy instrument, but it wasn't a budget-neutral policy tool. So a little more than a half a year, 1.5 years ago, the government took away the bonus side. So we have only a malus system at the moment. That's quite interesting, but it raises the cost for the alternative to the EV rather than lower the price for the EV. Yeah. So that's an interesting thing. But we also have a tax, yearly tax that is CO2 related and related to the European CO2 marking of the car. So that is a kind of policies we have also. There is a possibility for environmental zones in Sweden, different levels, 3 levels really, and the strongest one with EVs are not used yet, but it might turn out that we will have such from the 1st of January next year in Stockholm, in a small area, and it's very interesting to see what the effect of such an environmental zone could be. We're also looking at a scrapping policy at the moment. It's not decided yet, but there's a budget, and so if you scrap an ordinary car, you get a bonus to if you buy an EV instead.
And as the bonus,
that's kind of things we're looking at.
Okay, with the bonus-malus system, as the bonus disappeared, is the malus sufficient to, how to say, on a TCO basis, cover the difference between electric and petrol vehicles? Or
I would say, in generally, no. What we've seen in the market, but we have had a low level in the economy at the same time. So it's quite complex. So sales of EVs, we're about 30% of the new sales are EVs in Sweden, and 20% are plug-in hybrids. So it's over 50% still. But the market consists mainly of company cars. Private users have lowered their purchase or their share of EVs, really. Before and affected by the policy, we were at the level of 40% EVs and 20% plug-in hybrids, so almost 60% in total. So that shifted a little bit, but I don't know whether it's the takeaway of the bonus or if it's the general economic situation that affects it the most. Yeah. But we expect the sales of EVs go down this year, but increase again 25 and 26 and 27. That's what our forecast says.
Yeah, very interesting, Anders. Okay, thank you very much up to now. Also for you, feel free to check in the chat the questions that are coming. We will come back to all the panelists later. But I'd now like to go to Matt Ursin from Fastnet. And we have been talking about the slow charging infrastructure in Sweden. Fastnet is about fast charging, of course, as the name it says. So for you, Matt, the following question. Few fast charging points were also identified as a disadvantage, but it was not as important as the price, the range, or the availability of public slow charging points. What are the main hurdles you encountered as a CPO, and that could also affect consumers?
Thank you. Thank you. Well, first, congratulations and thank you for this survey. This is really helpful for us and valuable information because we as a CPO, of course, are the business of providing charging for EVs, but also deploying this infrastructure. But it is of no help for us to have a certain number of charging stations if the EV uptake and the transition to EVs does not happen, because then we don't have cars coming to charge at our stations. So all of those topics that were discussed are of highest relevance, including the quality aspect. I don't want to dwell too much on the specific problems that CPOs have or face in terms of deploying infrastructure. I just want to mention a couple of them that I think everyone is aware. Location is a big issue for us. Scarcity of location on highways. In the survey, there were some concerns about traveling between countries, and people are anxious to be able to, of course, charge. In this case, we're talking about fast charging mainly, because nobody will want to spend 5-6 hours somewhere in the rest area on the way to Spain. So it's a big problem. We have, of course, with the AFIA regulation, it's a clear signal to member states to deploy, to take action with specific deadlines and targets. That's fantastic and welcome that, but it does not, of course, address the issue about how the infrastructure should be rolled out and who does what. We see currently, especially on highways and rest areas, policies of tenders that are sometimes bundled approaches, like, for example, in Germany, where they want to go what they consider to be the easy way, saying like, well, we have gas stations, they just added a couple of chargers next to them. This is the wrong way. And that brings me to another point that I find is a bit missing in this discussion, and also a bit, if I might say, in this survey. We're talking about numbers of chargers. What's missing there is that a charger that is there's a capacity of 22 kilowatts is a completely different story than one that has 220 or 300 kilowatts. Because I have, for example, here I live in Brussels, I have in Elsen and Ixelles, there are a few chargers, slow chargers close to my home, and I drive an EV, but I'm not able to charge because either, well, let's say they function, that that there's quality, there's no quality issue. Well, there's a car that parks there for 5 hours, and even when the car has finished charging, it still parks there because people just leave it there. Basically, from the, I guess, government of Brussels point of view, they did their job because there are chargers in Ixelles, but, well, I can't charge. I have to drive out close to the airport to go to either our station or to another competitor station to charge. So it's very important that we look into also the capacity instead of the number of chargers. That's one thing. The second thing also, where do we deploy AC charging, slow charging, and where we deploy fast charging? When I go for my grocery shopping somewhere and there are charges in the parking, but how much time do I spend in the supermarket? I'm not spending 5 hours. And if I connect my car and start charging on a slow charger in the parking lot of a supermarket, when I come back, I've charged for 5 kilometers. I don't even bother to take out the plug and start charging. So those aspects are, I think, very important to take into consideration in terms of deployment. There is space and necessity for slow charging, for fast charging, for home charging, public charging, and destination charging. It's all important, but we need to develop an approach that takes into account where is what needed and what makes sense. On quality issue, if I might say a few words, this is an important topic, but we also need to be able to talk clearly about what we're talking about. How do we calculate this percentage? Anders was talking about 95% rule. But what do we do? I mean, how do we responsibilize the CPOs? What happens when we have vandalism, for example, and when there's anything that happens that is not, or grid problems, we just don't have the power. So is that the CPO's fault in that case? How do you count it into the threshold that you are counting the CPOs accountable? So we need to be able to come up with a formula where we talk about the same thing and don't compare apples with pears and don't have a situation where we are not advancing. But we are working, for example, in the framework of our industrial association, Charge Up Europe, with a very specific formula that makes, we think, sense, and we're happy to provide further information on that. And lastly, maybe on the affordability, signage is very important for us. Perception of availability of charging. The perception, this is what you are measuring in your survey, does not completely match sometimes the reality on the ground, but it has also something to do with the fact that some of those chargers are somewhere at the end of a parking lot, not visible. People don't even know it. When you drive on a highway, you have very clear signs. I know when, if I drive a internal combustion engine car, that there is a fuel station and that the next one is in, I don't know, 35 kilometers. Why don't we have signage about charging infrastructure? Why am I dependent on my in-car app or on my iPhone, which probably I can't even use while I'm driving? So we have rules still where we are not allowed to put our signs. We are building full-scale stations, for example, at Fastnet, but we still are fighting to get permits to put our, what we call poles or totems, to also provide this information. So visibility is very important. Also in terms of rules at municipal level, and also in tenders in countries like Denmark, where the infrastructure is rolled out, we have very specific design that the authorities have in mind. And well, they are not in this business. They don't have the 12 years experience that we have. So we are obliged to develop a station charging facility, which actually we know that is not going to provide the quality level that we wish we could, or also the information and visibility that we will put. And affordability, my last point, this is a major topic. Of course, the subsidies and all those policies have been phased out. That's really unfortunate. I think that was too early, but we also need the governments, also at the European level, very clear signals also to be sent to the citizens that electrification, e-mobility, that this is the future, and that we don't question things also for the investors in this sector, not only charging, but also for the car makers, talking about technology neutrality. I mean, yes, of course, we have to keep an open mind, but we need to send everyone a strong signal saying like electric mobility is happening, and work all together towards this goal. I think this is essential.
You're talking about the power levels, Matt. What's the challenge for a CPO? Because 10 years ago, a 50 kilowatt charger was a fast charger. Nowadays, with 50 kilowatts, you can't do much. And then you had the 150 kilowatts. You're talking about 300 kilowatts. Maybe in a few years, it will be 400 kilowatts. We are even talking about gigawatt charging infrastructure we are developing here in Brussels. So, but I can imagine that's a challenge for a CPO to have a return on investment if you have to upgrade each time your infrastructure. Or can you manage that change in the market and the need for faster and faster charging infrastructure?
Well, I mean, I can speak only for my company. We have always been very keen to to ensure that the stations that we build have the highest capacity possible. We don't have anywhere 50 kilowatt chargers as Fastnet, for example. This is very important for us because this consumer experience is essential overall for the EV uptake, of course, because we have this responsibility. We're much aware of that. But also, of course, we are entering a phase of consolidation in this market. And we think that in 5 years from now, some of the CPOs will not be there. And we want to be, as Fastnet, one of the main players at European level. So for us, it's very important that what we install, there's, of course, the aspect of uptime we mentioned earlier, but that people are able, that if today the technology exists, that there are manufacturers who provide these chargers. We work with several companies, with ABB, with Alpitronic, so that those chargers are available. So we would go for those and install, thinking about not what is this current situation now, but we are looking into what's going to happen in 1 year, in 2 years, in 3 years' time, and want to make sure that our infrastructure is future-proof. But of course, we will need at a certain point, because there will be better technology available to adapt. Also, the car, the battery technology, everything is evolving so fast. It's important. Of course, it's a challenge. But then I think it's an issue of business model and how smart the companies are, and how in long perspective they calculate the investments.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for your insights. I'm also looking to the time. Supposed to be a timekeeper, and time is running. And concerning the infrastructure, I'd like to come back to the European Commission, to Axel, to highlight a little bit his point of view on AFIR. And so what are the key aspects in AFIR that could support consumers when using public charging infrastructure? Can you elaborate a little bit on this, Axel?
Well, of course, thanks. No, we have put a great emphasis in AFIR not only on ensuring that there is sufficient publicly accessible infrastructure throughout the Union on the TEN-T and overall with the national fleet-based targets and the TEN-T maximum distance-based target, but we have also put a strong emphasis on the user friendliness and on the transparency of using this infrastructure. You know, most of you will be very familiar with Article 5 and the conditions that we have put there for price transparency, so that we end the situation that you do a charging and you're not fully aware before you start the charging on what you are actually going to be charged. That you can always, as a fallback option, pay, you know, with your credit card or any other common payment instrument at a charging point, so that you're not being left there with a payment problem, etc. So I think in that sense, AFIR is, as was said already before, quite an important regulatory development for both the minimum of sufficient infrastructure we need and the easiness for using it. And of course, the third one is the requirements that we put out through Article 20 on the data and data exchange. Because as you noted, I mean, we need innovative, we need comprehensive mobility services that help users easily find and be aware of the infrastructure. So what is where, and that data needs to be reliable. And I think there we have created the basis now really for building a sort of comprehensive, high quality database that will really guide the use of this infrastructure. So that's what we intend to do. That's what the co-legislator intend to do now. Of course, it's a time for implementation. It's very important. And the member states have to draw up their national policy frameworks in draft by end of this year, how they intend to sort of take the measures to implement these targets and requirements. And we have to follow that very closely to see that sort of the intention of the regulation is also directly sort of translated into the reality. And one last point, Yuri, and that is important, speaking, you know, from a consumer point of view, we are having now a regulation, and the regulation directly applies, particularly in view of the conditions for CPOs as regards user friendliness and transparency, directly applies. Hence, there's direct access to national courts. So we expect also now an increasing competition, where basically issues of misbehavior will be much easier, much quicker be addressed directly through access to court cases rather than through lengthy procedures of non-compliance with member states. So let's see. we are confident that we've done a good job here, and of course, but the implementation and reality will have to tell us what we need to fine tune in the upcoming review.
That's the approach we know, and follow up the policy you are making. But did you have some concrete advice for policymakers at one side or the industry partners at the other side?
Well, I mean, the one thing we need to recognize in particular when we come to urban, and I think it was before said also by Matt, we need to understand what works where, how, and when. That cities in Europe also differ remarkably, and of course colleagues from Policy here know best. You have an Italian city which is very different compared to a Finnish city in terms of housing structure, in terms of ownership of garages, in terms of access to private and public infrastructure. So what will work in one country will always be a little bit different to what works maybe in another country when we speak about recharging infrastructure in densely populated urban areas. So there we have to see, and there's not kind of one size fits all, but we of course see, and here I also agree a bit with what Matt was saying. On the one hand, we see an increased emphasis with putting out faster recharging pools, which is basically resembling a little bit more the model we have with conventions. But we will also see increasingly the rollout of, recharging infrastructure, faster recharging, so not slow, at supermarkets, at shopping malls, etc., where indeed, depending on the type of charger you have, so it might be attractive to charge for half an hour, for 1 hour, etc. But again, recall, I would not say we are early stage of the market, because that we have passed. We are over 700,000 publicly accessible charging points, but we are still a young market. And so it still needs to grow a bit, and we need to understand. And it will, I think, for the next 2 to 3 years, really be a very important period of time where we see what works and what does not work. And we unfortunately will still have to accept the fact that some things will be tried and maybe not everything works.
Thank you. Very interesting. Thank you very much. Yeah, due to the time, if you want to stop around 5 o'clock, what I noticed that some of the panel members already have addressed some of your questions in the chat, so that is very nice. I also like to refer all of you to the EAFO website, because the reports have been made available, I think, as of today. So there's a lot of information on the Consumer Monitor available on the EAFO website, where probably you can find a lot of questions you still have. Of course, in case there are still some other questions of which you cannot find the answers in the reports, you can always email us, the team in Brussels at my university, as well as the panel members directly, in case you still have some questions. Maybe to conclude, before we give the last word to Axel, Lieselot, do you have, or maybe you can share the QR code of where they can find the reports and say a last word?
Yes, thank you, Yuri. I saw a lot of interesting questions and the discussion with the panel members. Very interesting to see how everything can, the information that we presented can feed into practice, into policy measures, and how it very closely links. I must point out that in the chats I saw Magdalena replying quite a bit, and actually, Magdalena, thank you for the testimonial that you do as a consumer. You indeed highlight the issues that have been or came forward from the survey, the very practical issues that citizens have in terms of nearby and accessible charging infrastructure that fits their needs. But also the price differences and traveling abroad. On the other hand, I must say that if we look deeper into the results of the survey, there is also an optimistic message to give that on a short time period, people look forward and they are convinced about the benefits. So it's a matter of actually going into that purchase phase. And maybe, as Pedro has been suggesting, creative policy measures like shared mobility vouchers for scrappage reasons. So these kinds of measures can help citizens with that. A last thing on the methodology, Mats Ola has been asking questions there in terms of the representativeness of the sample. And Mats Ola, I can, as Dennis did, indeed reassure you that we have fully met the scientific standards there. So we can say that results here are representative for the citizens in the countries that have been surveyed. The battery electric vehicle driver sample has been increased with a convenience sample to make sure that we had sufficient answers. But we met scientific standards there. And there was a question in terms of open data also from Victoria. And yes, indeed, we will be publishing the data sets. We are still finalizing our reports, and afterwards the data sets will be fully publicly accessible, and we look forward to more insights with different studies from other researchers on that. So I think that sums up my responses to the questions. And Axel, I hand the floor to you for the concluding note.
Thank you, Lisbeth. I'll take one more minute because we're already past over time, just to emphasize once more that this is really a rich and comprehensive database. I mean, we did not really have the time to look into details of comparison, but it really allows you to compare the different national markets and user perspectives, and that is useful and helpful because it shows you differences and commonalities. Evidently, as many of you pointed out, we need not only to get to more affordable, but simply to a broader availability of vehicle models. We also know that this is going to happen in the next years to come. But the question is, of course, how much, how fast, will it sort of be the key turning point? As we said, there's a lot of things that can be done at a local, regional, and national level to further sort of make it attractive to purchase such vehicles, also smaller vehicles, through planning, through permitting, through fiscal incentives. We see that happening. We see also the evidence that it works, particularly fiscal incentives with corporate fleets, which are important driver in the EU for the market uptake. So we will also we can also build on the national policy framework process to push further with these lessons learned, building then on the consumer monitor that we have here as well. And voila, with that, I leave it. I would like to thank all of you. I would like to thank the VOB colleagues, and I would like to thank all the EAFO team colleagues who really have worked, throughout the months and years with us on making all of this happen. It's an important tool, EAFO. It gives the data we need. And we hope that we will, well, we do not hope, we will continue it, of course, with new features, with even better quality, and also hopefully with an extended focus on consumer insights. So with that, many thanks for having joined us, and we look forward to continuing the exchange and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.